It was just another quiet night shift at the hospital, the kind of night when everything felt like it was falling into a rhythm. The floors were calm, with fewer patients than usual. In the midst of the soft hum of machines and the distant sound of nurses moving from room to room, there was a sense of peace, a relief from the chaos of the day. The nurse had been doing this for years, and she had learned to love the late-night hours. It was her time to focus. The world outside had slowed down, and so had the hospital. It allowed her to give more attention to her patients without the constant rush that came with the daytime shift. She could hear the gentle beeping of the monitors, the sound of footsteps echoing on the hospital's clean linoleum floors, and the soft murmur of nurses talking quietly in the hallways. She was one of those nurses who was often told she had a special touch. Her patients could sense it, and so could her colleagues. She had a calm, reassuring presence that made even the toughest cases a little easier to handle. Her patients trusted her, and her colleagues respected her. Tonight, she was assigned to the usual set of tasks: checking in on patients, updating their charts, making sure they were comfortable, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as the clock ticked past midnight, things took an unexpected turn. A senior nurse, someone who had worked at the hospital for years, came up to her in the hallway a bit flustered. "Hey," she said quietly, "I need you to stay a bit longer tonight. There's a new patient coming in, and we need all hands on deck." The nurse didn't hesitate. She could see the concern in the senior nurse's eyes. There was something about her expression that told her this wouldn't be a regular night. "Sure," she said with a small nod, even though she was already feeling a bit tired. Her shift was supposed to end in an hour, but she knew the hospital was short-staffed, and if someone needed her, she wouldn't walk away. The senior nurse explained quickly. "It's a newborn. Premature. We're expecting the baby to need immediate care once they arrive." The nurse nodded again, trying to push away any thoughts of fatigue. She had seen premature babies before. She knew the drill. But still, there was something about the way this was being handled that felt different. The hospital was always busy, but the urgency in the senior nurse's voice made it clear this was something more serious. As she walked down to the NICU, her mind was already shifting gears. She had a duty, and she was ready to take on whatever came her way. The baby's parents were likely going to be worried, scared. Her role would be to offer them comfort and ensure they knew everything possible was being done. When she entered the NICU, she found the team already preparing. A small incubator was waiting, the warm light already glowing inside. The nurses moved with practiced efficiency, ready for what was to come. The baby's condition had been serious enough that they anticipated complications, but the nurse had no idea just how serious things would get. Soon, a stretcher arrived with the tiny, fragile newborn. The baby's skin was translucent, and the size of the little body made it seem as though it could fit in the nurse's hands. The sight tugged at her heartstrings, but she quickly pushed any emotional reaction aside. This was no time for distractions. There was work to be done. The team moved swiftly, hooking up monitors, checking vitals, and doing everything they could to stabilize the newborn. The nurse stood by, watching, ready to jump in if needed. As the baby's vitals were taken and updated, the nurse couldn't help but feel a connection, even though it had only been a few minutes. The baby's tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, so fragile yet so full of life. It was a reminder of why she had become a nurse in the first place. She wasn't just taking care of patients. She was making a difference in their lives, even in ways she couldn't always see or understand. For the next hour, the nurse stayed by the newborn's side. Her hands moved with precision as she checked and rechecked everything, ensuring the tiny baby was receiving the care it needed. There were no loud beeps or alarms, nothing indicating an immediate crisis, but the quietness only made the nurse feel more aware of how fragile this little life was. During those long moments, she found herself thinking about her own life. She had been a nurse for many years now, and she was good at what she did. She had helped so many people, been there for so many families, and had always felt that sense of fulfillment when she saw a patient get better. But tonight was different. There was something about this newborn that made her think of her own hopes and dreams, things she had put on hold while dedicating herself to her career. As the minutes turned into hours, she realized she hadn't thought about the world outside the hospital for a while. She hadn't thought about how long it had been since she had been on a real vacation, or how often she had put her own personal life aside to care for her patients. She had always loved what she did, but she couldn't ignore the part of her that longed for something more. Maybe it was the quiet of the night, or maybe it was the way this little life seemed to be fighting so hard for survival. But the nurse found herself wondering about her own future. What would it look like? Would she continue this path, dedicating herself to others, or would she one day have her own family, her own children? The shift felt like it was lasting forever, but finally the baby began to stabilize. The team had done what they could, and now it was up to the little one to keep fighting. The nurse stepped back, taking a deep breath. It wasn't the first time she had been part of such a delicate situation, but there was something different about this one. As she was about to leave the NICU for a break, she glanced back at the tiny baby. Lying under the soft light of the incubator, the baby's tiny hand was visible, resting peacefully against the soft fabric. For some reason, the sight of it stayed with her as she walked away, her mind still focused on the little life she had just helped care for. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a deep connection to this newborn. It wasn't something she had planned for or expected, but she felt a stirring inside her, a sense that this night, this decision to stay a little longer, might end up being the most significant of her life. And as she sat down for a few moments of rest, she couldn't help but wonder how this tiny, fragile life would shape her own future in ways she couldn't yet understand. The following days were a blur for the nurse. The routine of caring for patients during her shifts continued, but something had shifted inside her. Her mind often wandered back to the newborn in the NICU, the small, fragile baby she had helped that night. It wasn't just a passing thought. She found herself wondering about that little life, about how they were doing, about the journey they would take. Despite the busy nature of her work, that tiny hand wrapped around her finger seemed to stay with her, quietly tugging at her heart. Every time she walked past the NICU, her eyes would briefly glance toward the small incubator, hoping to catch a glimpse of the baby. She had been told that the infant was improving, but she needed to know for herself. She needed to see that tiny soul once again. One day, when she entered the NICU during a routine check, she saw the baby's parents standing by the incubator. They looked tired, their faces worn from the stress of the past few days, but there was also something else in their eyes, a glimmer of hope. The nurse approached them, a soft smile on her face, as she always did when meeting with family members. "How's our little one?" the mother asked, her voice soft, filled with concern. The nurse could see the worry in their eyes, but she also saw how deeply they loved their child, how much they were willing to fight for their baby. She walked over to the incubator and checked the baby's vitals before turning back to the parents. "He's doing much better," she said reassuringly. "His heart rate is more stable now and his breathing is stronger. He's still very fragile, but the progress he's made in just a few days is remarkable." The parents nodded, relief washing over their faces, though it was clear they knew their baby still had a long road ahead. The nurse continued to monitor the baby, offering the parents comfort and answering their questions as best she could. She could feel a deep connection with them too, seeing how their love and dedication mirrored her own commitment to her patients. For the rest of the shift, the nurse continued her work, but she kept returning to the NICU to check on the baby. With each passing hour, the infant's condition improved, but it was still touch and go. The nurse had seen many cases like this over the years where a baby fought to survive, but something about this one was different. Perhaps it was the way she had connected with the baby during that first night, or the way the infant seemed to be holding on, as if knowing someone was there watching over them. Whatever it was, it left an imprint on her heart. As the days went on, the baby's condition continued to improve. The nurses kept a close eye on him, monitoring every aspect of his health. It wasn't long before the parents were able to hold their baby for the first time. The nurse stood by, watching the tender moment, feeling a sense of pride for the small part she had played in this child's recovery. She had seen this kind of joy before, but something about witnessing it now felt more personal, more meaningful. The first time the baby's mother held him, the nurse felt a rush of emotion. It was a moment of victory, not just for the parents, but for everyone who had cared for the baby. Every nurse, every doctor, every person who had done their best to give this child a chance at life. The nurse knew this moment would stay with her forever. It was a reminder of why she chose this path, why she dedicated her life to helping others. It wasn't just about providing medical care. It was about making a real difference in someone's life. The next few days passed quickly. The nurse continued to care for her other patients while also checking in on the baby, whenever she had a spare moment. The infant's health steadily improved, and before long the parents were told they could take their baby home. The nurse was there when they packed up their things, ready to leave the hospital and start the next chapter of their lives with their newborn. Before they left, the mother took the nurse's hand, looking up at her with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "We wouldn't be here without your help. You saved our son." The nurse smiled, a little embarrassed by the praise. "I didn't do it alone. It was a team effort. Your baby is a fighter, and that made all the difference." But even as she said those words, the nurse knew there was something more to it. The bond she had felt with that baby, the connection she had made with the parents, was something that couldn't be explained away as just a part of her job. It was something deeper, something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. After the parents left, the nurse stood in the NICU for a moment, reflecting on the journey she had just witnessed. She thought about the long nights, the uncertainty, and the quiet hope that had filled that small room. She thought about how, just a few days ago, she had felt a sense of doubt about her own life and her own future. But seeing the baby's recovery, seeing the love and strength of the parents, made her realize that the work she did mattered. It was making a difference not just in the lives of her patients, but in the world. As the days went by, the nurse's thoughts kept returning to that baby. She had seen many cases in her career, but this one had stayed with her in a way that no other had. It wasn't just the medical aspect of it, it was the human connection. The way the baby had clung to life, the way the parents had shown so much love and resilience, and the way the nurse had been there every step of the way, offering support and care. It all felt so much bigger than a typical shift at the hospital. She began to wonder about her own life, about the future she had put on hold. Her job had always been her focus, and she had never really thought about starting a family. But now she couldn't help but wonder if there was more for her out there. Maybe, just maybe, the same sense of hope and love that had surrounded that baby could also be part of her life someday. The thoughts were fleeting, but they lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that this experience had changed her. And somehow, in a way she couldn't yet understand, it felt like it had set her on a new path. The baby's progress continued, and eventually, the nurse stopped by the NICU one last time to check on the little one before the end of her shift. The infant was now breathing steadily on his own, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. The nurse couldn't help but smile as she looked at the baby, who had gone from being so fragile to becoming a symbol of strength and hope. She knew she had done her part, but she also knew that this baby's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about the love and care that had been given by so many. And somehow she felt like that love had been a part of her too. As she left the NICU that night, the nurse felt a sense of peace. She had helped save a life. But more than that, she had been reminded of what truly mattered: human connection, love, and the hope that, even in the most difficult moments, everything could turn around. Weeks passed, and with each new day, the nurse found herself returning to the NICU, drawn to the small life she had helped save. The baby had gone from being incredibly fragile to gaining strength each day. The nurse watched with pride as the infant's health improved, the tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, more steady and strong. Every time she walked into the NICU, she would glance at the little one, seeing how far he had come since that first night she had stayed late. It felt like a miracle, but it wasn't just the baby's recovery that had a lasting impact on the nurse. It was the connection she had felt, not only with the infant but also with the parents. She hadn't expected to become so emotionally involved, but there was something about them, their resilience, their unwavering belief in their child, that made her care even more deeply than she already did. She had been a nurse for a long time, but this experience felt different. It was like the baby had somehow become a part of her, and so had the family. Every time the parents visited, they thanked her for everything she had done. She knew they were grateful, but they had no idea how much they had done for her as well. One afternoon, as the nurse finished her shift and prepared to leave for the day, she saw the parents in the hallway. They were talking to the doctor, discussing the baby's progress. When the mother noticed the nurse, she waved and smiled, her eyes still filled with gratitude. "Hey there," the mother said, walking over with the father by her side. "We just wanted to thank you again for everything. You've been so kind to us and to our son. We'll never forget what you've done." The nurse smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had always done her best to take care of her patients. But hearing such heartfelt words from these parents made her feel as though she had truly made a difference in their lives. "You're very welcome," the nurse replied, her voice soft. "It's been an honor to be part of your son's journey. He's a fighter, and he's lucky to have you both." The mother's eyes misted over as she nodded. "It hasn't been easy, but we've made it through. And we know we couldn't have done it without you." The nurse didn't know how to respond to that. She had always believed that her job was just to do her best, to care for those who needed her. But she hadn't realized how much of an impact she could have on someone's life, especially in a situation like this. It was humbling, and it filled her with a quiet sense of pride that she hadn't felt in a long time. As she turned to leave the hospital that day, her thoughts were heavy with everything that had happened. She had spent so many years focused on her career, on making a difference in the lives of others, but she had never really thought about what she needed or wanted for herself. She had always pushed aside thoughts of her own future, believing that the work she did was enough. But now, with the memories of the past few weeks fresh in her mind, she found herself wondering about her own life, about the things she had been putting off. That night, as she sat in her small apartment, the nurse found herself reflecting on everything that had brought her to this point. She had dedicated so much of her life to her patients, always putting others first. She had built a career, but somewhere along the way she had lost sight of her own dreams. She had never married, never had children. The idea of starting a family had always felt distant, something for another time, another place. But now she couldn't help but wonder if that time might be closer than she had realized. She thought about the parents of the baby, the love they had for their child, the way they supported each other through the hardest moments. It wasn't just their love for the baby that had kept them going. It was the bond they shared, the family they were creating. It made her question if she had been too focused on her work, too afraid to let herself truly connect with someone. She had built walls around her heart, telling herself that she didn't need anyone, that her job was enough. But was it? The nurse shook her head, trying to push away the feelings that were creeping in. She wasn't sure if she was ready to make those kinds of changes in her life. She had spent so many years doing what she loved, helping others, that the idea of something different, of allowing someone into her heart, felt like a huge shift. But the thoughts didn't go away. Instead, they sat in the back of her mind, a quiet but persistent reminder that maybe it was time to open herself up to something more. In the weeks that followed, the nurse continued to care for the baby and his family. The little one was growing stronger every day, and the parents were finally able to take their baby home from the hospital. It was a bittersweet moment for the nurse. She had become so attached to the infant, and even though she knew it was time for them to leave, a part of her wasn't ready to say goodbye. She had been with the baby through the darkest moments, watching him fight for life, and now she would have to let him go. But she knew it was for the best. The family had their son back, and that was what mattered. When the parents came to say their goodbyes, the nurse felt a lump form in her throat. The mother gave her a tight hug, and the father shook her hand, both of them thanking her once again for everything she had done. As they left the hospital, the nurse stood there for a moment, watching them walk out the door with their baby, feeling a sense of fulfillment, but also a quiet sadness. This chapter was over, but it was one that had left a lasting impression on her. The next few days passed in a blur. The nurse continued her shifts, but her mind was no longer entirely focused on her work. She found herself thinking about her own future, about the possibility of building a life outside of the hospital. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the time had come for her to make some changes. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of her career, putting her own dreams on hold. The experiences she had gained over the years, the connections she had made with her patients, had taught her valuable lessons about love, life, and the importance of family. One evening, after a long shift, the nurse found herself standing outside the hospital, looking up at the stars. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew something had shifted inside her. The baby, the family, the connection she had felt with them, it had all opened her heart in ways she hadn't expected. And now she was ready to see where that new openness would take her. The nurse had been thinking about the baby and his family for weeks after they left the hospital. Even though she knew it was part of the job to help patients and watch them move on, something about that little one had stayed with her. She had been a part of his story during a time when he was at his most vulnerable, and now he was safe and thriving at home. But the connection she had felt wasn't something she could easily shake off. She had continued with her usual routine, helping other patients and going through the motions of each shift, but there was a quiet shift inside her. The constant stream of faces and stories had begun to blur together, but the memory of that tiny hand, the way the baby had fought to survive, remained sharp in her mind. One day, a few weeks after the baby's discharge, she was walking down the hospital corridor when she saw the parents standing near the nurse's station. At first, she wasn't sure if it was them, but then the mother looked up and smiled. Her heart skipped a beat and she walked over quickly. "Hey there," the mother said warmly, her eyes lighting up when she saw the nurse. "We've been meaning to come by and thank you again. We wanted to see how you were doing." The nurse was caught off guard. "It's so good to see you both," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "I've been thinking about you and the baby a lot." The father stepped forward, shaking the nurse's hand with gratitude. "We just wanted to say thank you for everything you did. It's because of you that we have our son with us today." The nurse felt a lump in her throat, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had always been a professional, focused on her work. But moments like these reminded her of the deep emotional connections that could form between a nurse and a patient. She had seen so many lives touched by her care, but this one felt different. There was something special about this family, and she had been lucky enough to witness their journey. "We've been doing great," the mother continued. "He's growing so fast. We're still in awe that we got through that time, but we wouldn't have made it without you." The nurse smiled, trying not to get too emotional. "I'm just glad I could help. Your baby is a fighter." The parents shared a look and the mother spoke again, her voice softer now. "Actually, we wanted to ask you something." The nurse tilted her head, curious. "Of course. What is it?" The father cleared his throat. "Well, we've been talking about this for a while and we've decided we'd like to stay in touch. We're incredibly grateful for everything you've done, and we feel like you're part of our family now. Would you consider coming to visit us? We'd love for you to meet him now that he's doing so well." The nurse was surprised. She had always kept a professional distance with her patients, not wanting to blur the lines between work and personal life. But something about their request felt different. It wasn't just a thank you. It was an invitation into their world, into their family. She hadn't expected this, but she also couldn't deny the warmth that filled her heart at the thought of seeing the baby again. "I would love that," the nurse said, her voice sincere. "It would be an honor to meet him and see how he's doing." The parents exchanged smiles, clearly pleased by her response. "We'll make sure to send you the details," the mother said. "We're looking forward to it." As the nurse walked away from the hospital that day, her mind was racing. She had never been one to mix her personal life with her work, but there was something about this family that made her feel like it was the right thing to do. She had seen how hard they had fought for their son, how much love and dedication they had poured into him, and she had been a small part of that story. She couldn't deny that it felt like more than just a job. It had become something deeply meaningful to her. A few days later, the nurse received a message from the parents inviting her to their home. They had set a date and she was filled with excitement and nervousness at the same time. She had never visited a patient's home before, but this felt different. It wasn't about duty. It was about connection. It was about seeing a family who had been through so much. A family she had grown close to in a way she hadn't expected. When the day arrived, the nurse felt a mix of emotions as she drove to their home. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that she had made the right decision by accepting their invitation. This wasn't just a thank you, it was an opportunity to see how the baby had grown and to witness firsthand the joy that had come out of their struggle. The parents welcomed her into their home with warmth and kindness, and she immediately felt at ease. They had transformed their home into a cozy space, filled with toys, baby furniture, and the soft sounds of a baby's laughter. The nurse was amazed at how much the baby had changed. He was no longer the tiny, fragile infant she had first cared for. Now he was a healthy, happy baby, full of life and energy. His bright eyes shone with curiosity, and he giggled when the nurse waved at him. She couldn't help but smile as she knelt down to greet him. The mother beamed with pride as she spoke. "He's been growing so fast. We're still amazed at how far he's come. We owe so much to you." The nurse knelt beside the baby, gently picking him up and holding him in her arms. He snuggled against her, and she could feel the bond they had shared that first night coming alive again. It was a feeling she hadn't expected, but it was powerful. She had watched this baby fight for life, and now she was holding him, knowing that she had played a small part in his survival. As the visit continued, The nurse found herself laughing and talking with the parents, sharing stories of the hospital and listening to their experiences. They had been through so much, but they were stronger for it. The love they had for their child was evident in everything they did. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about living and cherishing every moment. As the afternoon wore on, the nurse felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had been a part of something special, something that went beyond her job. She had connected with this family, and in doing so, she had discovered a new part of herself. She realized that she had been so focused on her work, on being a caregiver, that she had neglected the possibility of building her own family. She had kept herself at a distance, afraid to let anyone in. But seeing the love and connection between the baby and his parents, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to open her heart. As the visit came to an end, the parents thanked her again, but this time, the nurse felt like the gratitude was mutual. She had learned something important about herself, about the power of connection, the importance of family, and the beauty of being there for others in ways she had never expected. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a part of their story, and they had become a part of hers. As she left their home that day, the nurse felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. She had always been so focused on helping others, but now she realized that in doing so, she had helped herself too. The love she had shared with this family had opened her eyes to new possibilities, to new ways of looking at her life and her future. The days after the visit to the family's home felt like a turning point for the nurse. For the first time in a long time, she found herself thinking about her own life, her own future. The time she spent with the baby and his parents had made her realize something important. Life was not just about the work she did, but also about the connections she made along the way. She had always been focused on her job, on helping others, but now she understood that helping herself was just as important. The baby, now a toddler, had continued to thrive. He was walking, babbling, and showing the kind of energy that only a healthy, happy child could. Every time the nurse saw pictures of him or received an update from the parents, her heart swelled with pride. She had been there at the beginning of his journey, and seeing how far he had come filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just the baby's recovery that had impacted her. It was the way his parents had welcomed her into their lives. They hadn't just thanked her for her work. They had made her feel like a part of their family. That had been unexpected, but it was a gift she would never forget. They had shown her what true love and commitment looked like, and it had opened her eyes to the possibility of having that kind of connection in her own life. For the first time, the nurse allowed herself to think about the things she had been putting off for years, her own dreams, her own desires. She had always told herself that her career was enough, that helping others was all she needed. But now, as she thought about the parents and the love they shared, she realized that she wanted more. She wanted the kind of bond they had, the kind of family they had built together. It wasn't an easy realization, but it was a necessary one. The nurse had spent so much time focusing on her career, on being the best nurse she could be, that she had neglected the part of her heart that yearned for connection. She had built walls around herself, telling herself that her work was enough, but now she knew that wasn't true. She had more to give, and she was ready to open herself up to the possibility of something new. One evening, after a long shift at the hospital, the nurse found herself sitting at home, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. She thought about the baby, about the parents, and about the way they had all come together. She thought about how far she had come, not just as a nurse, but as a person. She had learned so much from them, and it was clear that their journey had changed her in ways she hadn't expected. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from the parents. They had sent her a picture of the baby, who was now almost 2 years old, grinning widely with a big teddy bear in his arms. The nurse smiled as she looked at the picture, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "We're thinking of you," the message read. "The little one's doing great. We wanted to let you know that we'll be having a small get-together next weekend to celebrate. It wouldn't be complete without you." The nurse felt a surge of emotion. It wasn't just an invitation to a party. It was a reminder of everything she had been a part of. She had been with this family during their darkest hours, and now they were inviting her to celebrate with them. It was a beautiful gesture, one that made her feel like she truly belonged. She quickly typed a response. "I would love to come. I'm so grateful for everything and would be honored to celebrate with you all." As the week went on, the nurse found herself feeling more and more excited about the upcoming event. It wasn't just a chance to see the baby again. It was a chance to be part of something bigger. She wasn't just a nurse. She was someone who had made a difference in their lives, someone who had been there when they needed her most. When the day of the party arrived, the nurse dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, excited and nervous all at once. She had never been to a patient's celebration before, and it felt like an important moment. As she arrived at the house, she was welcomed with open arms. The parents greeted her like an old friend, and the house was filled with laughter and joy. The baby, now running around and laughing, immediately spotted her and ran over to give her a hug. His little arms wrapped around her waist, and she picked him up, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. "Look at you," she said, her voice full of affection. "You've grown so much." The baby giggled, his eyes sparkling with mischief. The nurse felt a deep sense of pride as she watched him. She had been a part of this journey from the very beginning, and now she was witnessing the joy and happiness that had come out of a difficult time. It was a reminder of why she did what she did. It wasn't just about the medical care. It was about the people, the families, and the lives that were touched along the way. As the party continued, the nurse found herself in conversation with the parents. They shared stories of their child's milestones, first steps, first words, and the everyday moments that made them so grateful for the life they now had. The nurse listened, captivated by the love and joy that filled the room. It was clear that their bond had only grown stronger, and their little boy was the center of their world. "I can't thank you enough for everything," the mother said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've been such an important part of our journey. We'll never forget what you did for us." The nurse smiled, her heart full. "I'm just glad I could help. You're the ones who did all the hard work. Your love and dedication got him through it." As the evening wore on, the nurse realized just how far she had come. She had started this journey as a dedicated but somewhat distant caregiver. She had been focused on her work, putting her own life on hold in order to take care of others. But now she understood the value of connection, the importance of family, and the beauty of being present in the lives of those around her. The party ended late, but as the nurse drove home, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't sure where the future would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer afraid to open her heart. The love and connection she had witnessed in that home had shown her that there was more to life than just her career. She had so much more to give, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The nurse had spent years helping others, but now she was ready to help herself, to build the kind of life and relationships that she had always dreamed of. And as she drove into the night, she couldn't help but smile, knowing that her own journey was just beginning. As the weeks passed, the nurse found herself reflecting on the changes that had taken place in her life. The little boy who had once been so fragile was now growing strong and healthy, running around and filling his home with laughter. The parents who had been through so much were thriving too. They had built a life of love and resilience, and it was clear that their journey had transformed not only them, but also everyone who had been part of it. The nurse had been a quiet observer in their lives, but her role in their story had become more important than she ever imagined. She wasn't just a nurse to them anymore. She had become a part of their family, a witness to their love and their struggle. And as she watched them, she realized that she too had changed. She had opened her heart, let go of her fears, and allowed herself to embrace the possibility of something more. Her days at the hospital continued, but there was a new sense of purpose behind her work. She had always been passionate about her job, but now she felt a deeper connection to her patients, knowing how much of an impact her care could have on their lives. She was no longer just a nurse. She was someone who understood the importance of the relationships she formed, both with her patients and with the people in her own life. The nurse had started to think about her future in a new way. She had always told herself that her work was enough, that helping others was all she needed, but now she saw that there was more to life. She had spent so many years focusing on her career that she had neglected the part of her that longed for connection and family. She had always been so focused on giving to others that she had forgotten to nurture her own dreams. One evening, after a particularly long shift, the nurse found herself sitting in her apartment, thinking about everything that had happened. The love and joy she had witnessed in that family's home had opened her eyes to what she had been missing. It wasn't just about doing her job. It was about sharing her life with others, about building meaningful relationships and being present in the world around her. She thought about the family again, about the way they had welcomed her into their lives, not just as a nurse but as a friend. They had invited her to celebrate their joy, to witness the triumph of their son's recovery, and in doing so, they had shown her the beauty of life beyond the hospital walls. She felt a sense of gratitude for everything they had given her, and she realized that it was time for her to make some changes in her own life. The nurse decided that she was ready to take a step forward, to embrace the idea of building her own family, of opening her heart to the possibilities that had once seemed too far out of reach. She wasn't sure what that would look like, but she knew she was ready to start the journey. A few weeks later, she received another message from the parents. They wanted to meet up for lunch, and the nurse happily agreed. She had come to value these moments with them, as they had become so much more than just a connection between patient and nurse. They had become friends, people who had shared a significant part of her life. When they met at a small cafe, the parents greeted her with the same warmth and kindness they always had. The baby, now a toddler, was with them, and he immediately ran over to the nurse, his little face lighting up as he wrapped his arms around her. "You've grown so much," the nurse said with a smile, picking him up and holding him close. He giggled, and the nurse's heart melted at the sight of his happiness. After a few moments, the parents sat down, and they began to talk about life, as they always did. But this time the conversation felt different. The nurse could sense a shift in herself, a growing realization that her own journey was just beginning. "I've been thinking a lot lately," the nurse said quietly, her voice thoughtful, "about everything, about what I want for my future, about the kind of life I want to build." The parents looked at her with curiosity and understanding, sensing that something had shifted in her. They had always supported her, always shown her love and appreciation, and now they listened intently as she shared her thoughts. "I've spent so much of my life focusing on my work," the nurse continued. "I love being a nurse. I love helping people, but I've realized that there's more to life than just that. I want to build connections, make a home, and have the kind of love and family that you two have." The parents exchanged a glance, their faces filled with warmth. "We're so happy for you," the mother said. "It's never too late to start building the life you want. You deserve to be happy, and you deserve to have everything you've been dreaming of." The nurse smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had spent so long being afraid of opening her heart, of allowing herself to dream of something more, but now she knew that it was possible. She wasn't sure exactly what the future held, but she felt ready to take the next step. Over the next few months, the nurse began to make changes in her life. She started to take more time for herself, focusing on her own happiness and well-being. She spent time with friends, explored new hobbies, and allowed herself to imagine a future filled with love and connection. She began to open up to the idea of a family, not just in her professional life but in her personal life as well. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the sunset, the nurse felt a sense of peace. She had spent so many years running from her own desires, afraid that pursuing them would mean sacrificing her career, but now she understood that it didn't have to be one or the other. She could have both. She could build a career that she loved and a life that was full of love and connection. The nurse continued her work at the hospital, but now she approached it with a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a person with dreams, with a future. She still poured herself into her patients, but she also made time for the things that mattered most, her own happiness and her connections with the people around her. One day, not long after, the nurse received a call from the family again. They wanted to invite her to a small gathering to celebrate their son's birthday. It was a milestone, a moment of joy, and they wanted her to be a part of it. The nurse couldn't help but smile as she accepted the invitation. She had been there for so much of their journey, and now she was excited to celebrate their happiness together. When the day arrived, the nurse found herself at their home, surrounded by laughter, love, and warmth. The baby, now a little boy, ran up to her with a big smile, and she scooped him up in her arms, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everything that had led her to this moment. She had been part of something beautiful, something that had changed her life in ways she hadn't expected. And now, as she looked around at the family she had helped, the family that had welcomed her into their hearts, she knew that her own journey was just beginning. Months passed, and the nurse continued her journey, now seeing the world through a different lens. Her time with the family had taught her invaluable lessons about love, resilience, and the importance of human connection. The little boy, once so fragile, was now thriving, full of energy and laughter. Every time she saw him or heard about his milestones, it felt like a victory not just for his parents, but for everyone who had been part of his journey. She had been there during the darkest moments of their lives, and now she was witnessing the light, the joy that had come after all the struggle. But for the nurse, something had changed within herself as well. She had learned to open her heart in ways she never had before. She had spent so many years focused on her work, putting her own needs and desires aside in order to care for others. But now she understood that she deserved more. She deserved to have a life filled with love, connection, and joy, just like the family she had come to care for so deeply. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting shift at the hospital, the nurse sat on a bench outside, taking a moment to breathe. The world seemed to be moving at a fast pace, but she had learned how important it was to pause, to appreciate the small moments. She had been so focused on her career, on doing everything for everyone else, but now she understood that she needed to take care of herself too. She thought about the changes she had made over the past few months, how she had allowed herself to dream, to think about the future, and to believe that she could have it all. The family had continued to stay in touch, sending updates and pictures of the little boy as he grew. The nurse had become a regular part of their lives, and the visits they shared had become moments of great joy. She cherished those times with them, as it reminded her of the importance of human connection. It wasn't just about caring for patients. It was about being present for the people you loved, about being there in moments of triumph and struggle alike. The nurse had also made changes in her own personal life. She had started going out more, meeting new people and allowing herself to build friendships that weren't just about work. She had even begun to think about her own future in a way she hadn't before. The idea of starting her own family seemed like a real possibility now, something she wanted to make a reality. It wasn't something she had considered in the past, but now it felt like the next step in her journey. One day, after receiving an invitation from the family to attend a community event, the nurse felt a wave of excitement and nervousness wash over her. The event was a fundraiser to support a local charity that helped families with newborns in need of medical care, and the family had asked her to attend as their guest. It would be the first time they had all been together outside of their home, and the nurse was eager to join them. But as she prepared for the event, she couldn't help but wonder about what the future might hold for her. How much longer she would continue to care for others without truly focusing on herself, on the life she wanted to build. The night of the event arrived, and the nurse arrived at the venue with a mixture of emotions. She had dressed carefully, wanting to feel confident but also comfortable in the setting. As soon as she stepped into the room, she felt the energy of the gathering, the laughter, the conversations, the sense of community. It wasn't just about raising money for a good cause. It was about connecting with others, sharing in something meaningful. The family was already there when she arrived, and as soon as they saw her, they waved her over. The little boy immediately ran up to her as he always did, and she bent down to scoop him up. His joy was contagious, and the nurse couldn't help but smile as she looked around at the people who had become so important to her. "You made it," the mother said, her eyes shining with warmth. "We're so glad you could join us." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," the nurse replied, feeling truly happy in that moment. The night went on with lively conversation, laughter, and a sense of camaraderie. The nurse found herself connecting with people outside of her usual circle, sharing stories about life, work, and dreams for the future. There was something about the event that made her feel like she was a part of something bigger, a community that supported one another, that celebrated the triumphs and endured the hardships together. As the evening came to a close, the nurse found herself standing outside, looking up at the stars. She had always been someone who believed in helping others, in making a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. But now she realized that she also deserved to have a life of her own, to be happy, to create the kind of relationships and connections that would fill her heart with joy. The family stood next to her, and the little boy ran over to give her a hug. "I'm so proud of you," the mother said, her voice full of sincerity. "You've always been there for us, and we can't thank you enough." The nurse smiled, her heart full. "It's been my honor. Watching him grow has been the greatest gift I could have ever asked for." As they stood together in the quiet night, The nurse couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had led her to this point. She had spent so many years focused on caring for others, but now, she understood that it was time for her to care for herself as well. It wasn't just about being a nurse, it was about being a person, someone who deserved love, connection, and happiness. The family's support had shown her that she wasn't alone on this journey. They had been there for her just as she had been there for them. And now, she realized that it was time for her to build the life she had always dreamed of, a life filled with the kind of love and joy that she had witnessed in their home. The nurse didn't know exactly what the future held, but she felt ready to face it with an open heart. She knew that whatever came her way, she had the strength to handle it. She had learned so much from the family she had come to love, and now, she was ready to take the next step toward her own happiness. As she walked away from the event that night, the nurse felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had made it through the hardest moments, and now she was ready to embrace the future with hope and excitement. The journey she had started with the baby and his family had taught her lessons that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. And as she looked ahead, she knew that whatever path she chose, she would walk it with love and an open heart.